The year is 1973. The Yom Kippur War erupts across the Middle East. Egyptian forces, equipped with thousands of Soviet tanks, pour across the Sinai Peninsula. Israeli armored divisions race to meet them in what should have been a conventional tank battle. But something unprecedented happens in the desert that October. Israeli AH-64 Cobra helicopters, American-made machines armed with wire-guided missiles, appear over the battlefield. They hover at distances the Syrian and Egyptian tank crews never anticipated. One by one, Soviet-designed T-55 and T-62 tanks explode. The helicopters are firing from ranges exceeding 3 kilometers. The tank commanders cannot effectively return fire. Their main guns, designed for ground warfare, struggle to elevate high enough. Their targeting systems cannot track fast-moving aerial threats at those distances. In 6 days of fighting, Israeli helicopter crews destroy hundreds of Arab tanks. The kill ratios are staggering. Single helicopters eliminate entire armored columns. Egyptian and Syrian forces, trained in Soviet doctrine, find themselves helpless against an enemy attacking from a dimension their tactics never adequately addressed. In Moscow, Soviet military analysts pore over the battle reports. The implications are catastrophic. For decades, Soviet military planning relied on overwhelming armored superiority. The strategy was called deep battle, a doctrine of massed tank formations driving deep into enemy territory, achieving breakthrough after breakthrough until resistance collapsed. Tens of thousands of tanks positioned across Eastern Europe represented the sword aimed at Western Europe's heart. NATO war games consistently showed that conventional forces could not stop a full Soviet armored assault. Now, a new variable had appeared. The helicopter gunship had demonstrated something Soviet planners had not fully considered: the ability to destroy tanks in large numbers from beyond effective retaliation range. The technology was American. And if the Israelis could do this with early-generation Cobras, what could the Americans do with purpose-built tank killers? At the Pentagon, the lessons of the Yom Kippur War were being absorbed with intense interest. The United States Army had been working on attack helicopter concepts since Vietnam, but the Desert War provided hard combat data that changed everything. The question was no longer whether helicopters could kill tanks. The question was how to build a machine that could do it better than anything else on Earth. The Apache program accelerated. Engineers at Hughes Helicopters received a clear mandate: create a helicopter specifically designed to destroy Soviet armor in massive numbers, survive intense combat, and operate in the worst possible conditions. This machine would need to fight at night, in terrible weather, while being shot at by everything the Warsaw Pact could throw at it. The design that emerged was unlike anything before it. The AH-64 Apache was built around a simple concept: survive and kill. Every system was redundant. The 2 crew members sat in separate armored compartments. The main rotor blades could withstand direct hits from 23mm cannon shells and keep flying. The engines were separated and shielded. The aircraft could lose hydraulics, take damage to the tail rotor, suffer electrical failures, and still make it home. But survival was only half the equation. The Apache needed to kill, and kill at ranges that made retaliation impossible. The weapon that would make this possible was already in development: the AGM-114 Hellfire missile. The name itself was an acronym: Heliborne Laser Fire and Forget Missile. The technology was revolutionary. A laser designator would paint the target. The missile, once fired, would guide itself to that laser spot. Fire and forget. One helicopter could illuminate targets, while others fired from concealed positions miles away. The range was the key. Hellfire could engage targets at 8 kilometers. Soviet tank main guns were effective at perhaps 2 kilometers under ideal conditions, far less against aerial targets. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Apache helicopters could destroy Soviet tanks from distances where the tanks could not fight back. Then came the night vision system. The target acquisition and designation sight, mounted above the rotor in that distinctive ball turret, contained forward-looking infrared sensors that turned night into day. Soviet forces relied heavily on darkness to mask movements and complicate NATO targeting. The Apache could see through that darkness as clearly as noon. It could identify individual vehicles at 4 kilometers in total blackness. It could track multiple targets simultaneously. The pilot and gunner each had their own sight systems, doubling the aircraft's ability to acquire and engage threats. Soviet military intelligence obtained detailed information about the Apache's capabilities through the 1980s. The reports were alarming. The Americans had created a weapon system that exploited every weakness in Soviet armored doctrine. The T-72 and T-80 tanks that represented the Soviet Union's finest achievements in armored warfare were vulnerable to attack from distances and angles they were never designed to counter. Moscow's response was to develop countermeasures. New anti-aircraft systems were deployed with tank formations. The Shilka self-propelled anti-aircraft gun and the SA-8 surface-to-air missile system were supposed to create protective bubbles around advancing armor. Soviet attack helicopters like the Mi-24 Hind were upgraded. Doctrine was revised to emphasize rapid movement and dispersal. But the fundamental problem remained. The Americans could see at night, shoot from beyond retaliation range, and their crews were training extensively for one specific mission: destroying Soviet tanks before they could reach the Rhine. Throughout the 1980s, Apache units trained relentlessly in Germany. The mission was always the same: stop the Soviet breakthrough. The tactics were refined over thousands of hours. Teams of Apaches would operate in coordinated hunter-killer groups. Scout helicopters would find the enemy. Apaches would move into firing positions using terrain for cover. They would unmask, fire multiple Hellfire missiles at different targets, and disappear behind hills or tree lines before the enemy could respond. Then repeat. The goal was to shatter Soviet armored formations before they could achieve the momentum that deep battle doctrine required. The Soviet Union never invaded Western Europe. The Cold War ended. The Apache had been built for a war that never came. But in August 1990, a different crisis erupted that would put every Apache theory to the ultimate test. Iraqi forces invaded Kuwait. Saddam Hussein's army was the fourth largest in the world, equipped with thousands of Soviet tanks and armored vehicles. Iraq's military had Soviet training, Soviet weapons, and Soviet doctrine. When Operation Desert Storm began in January 1991, it would be the first time Apache helicopters faced an enemy that looked exactly like the one they had been designed to destroy. The night of January 17, 1991, 8 AH-64 Apaches lifted off from bases in Saudi Arabia. Their mission was to penetrate Iraqi air defenses and destroy 2 early warning radar sites. These sites were part of Iraq's integrated air defense network. Taking them out would open a corridor for coalition aircraft to enter Iraqi airspace undetected. The Apaches flew low and fast across empty desert, navigating by GPS and terrain-following radar. They approached the target sites in total darkness. The FLIR systems turned the night green and clear. Iraqi soldiers at the radar sites had no idea death was hovering 3 kilometers away. Hellfire missiles launched. Seconds later, the radar installations exploded. 70-millimeter rockets saturated the area. In less than 4 minutes, both sites were obliterated. The Apaches had opened the door. Hundreds of coalition aircraft poured through the gap. The air war had begun. And it began with the Apache proving it could do exactly what it was designed for. Over the next weeks, Apache units hunted Iraqi armor across the desert. The tactics perfected in Germany worked flawlessly. Iraqi tank crews found themselves under attack from enemies they could not see in conditions where they could not fight back. Night attacks were particularly devastating. Iraqi forces had minimal night vision capability. Apache crews could see everything. The tank kills mounted steadily. Apaches destroyed T-72s, T-62s, T-55s, all the same Soviet designs that had once been pointed at Western Europe. The Hellfire missiles proved devastatingly effective. The range advantage was exactly as calculated. Iraqi anti-aircraft systems struggled to detect the Apaches operating at night, flying low, using terrain masking. Then came the ground war. On February 24th, coalition forces launched the final offensive. American armored divisions raced north into Iraq, then turned east toward the Euphrates River Valley, attempting to cut off Iraqi forces retreating from Kuwait. Apache units flew ahead of the ground assault, clearing paths through Iraqi defenses. What happened next would become one of the most infamous images of modern warfare. On the highway north from Kuwait City, Iraqi forces were retreating in massive columns. Military vehicles mixed with civilian trucks, stolen cars, anything that could move. The columns stretched for miles. Coalition aircraft, including Apaches, caught the column in the open. What followed was slaughter. Vehicles at the front and rear of the column were destroyed first, trapping everything in between. Then the systematic destruction began. For hours, aircraft made repeated runs. By dawn, the highway was a graveyard of twisted metal and burned vehicles. The press called it the Highway of Death. The Apache's role in that engagement was smaller than sometimes reported, but symbolic significance was undeniable. Here was the proof of concept, the demonstration of what had been theorized for 2 decades. Helicopters armed with precision missiles and advanced sensors could destroy armored vehicles in catastrophic numbers when conditions favored the attacker. Military analysts worldwide studied the Gulf War results. The Apache had performed beyond expectations. Over 500 AH-64s participated in Desert Storm. They destroyed 278 tanks, 367 armored personnel carriers, 120 artillery pieces, and hundreds of other vehicles. The loss rate was minimal. Of over 500 Apaches deployed, only 1 was lost to enemy fire during the entire war, and it was damaged and abandoned rather than shot down in flight. The implications were profound. The Apache had validated every assumption made during its development. Soviet-style armored warfare, the doctrine that had shaped military planning for 50 years, was obsolete against an enemy with technological superiority in night vision and precision-guided weapons. Russian military observers noted that Iraqi forces, while large and well-equipped, lacked the training and coordination of Soviet units. They argued that the outcome would have been different against properly trained forces with integrated air defenses. Perhaps, but the fundamental technological gap remained. The West could see at night. The West could shoot accurately at extreme ranges. The West had weapons that were smarter, sensors that were better, and systems that were integrated in ways that Soviet equipment was not. The Soviet Union itself was collapsing as Desert Storm concluded. The Cold War was over. The massive tank armies of Eastern Europe were being disbanded or left to rust. The Apache had been built for a specific enemy and a specific battlefield. That battlefield never materialized in Europe, but when a similar enemy appeared in Iraq, the results were everything the designers had promised. The Highway of Death became controversial because of the optics, the images of destroyed vehicles and dead soldiers. But militarily, it represented something important, the end of an era. The idea that massed armor could achieve decisive results against a technologically superior enemy was dead. The tank was not obsolete, but the way tanks had been used for decades, concentrated in large formations for breakthrough operations, was no longer viable. The Apache had been conceived as an answer to a Soviet threat. It had been designed to hunt tanks in the forests and fields of Central Europe. Instead, it proved itself in the deserts of Iraq. But the mission was the same: find the enemy, kill the enemy, survive, repeat. Everything else was just details. In the years since Desert Storm, the Apache has been continuously upgraded. New missiles, better sensors, improved engines, more sophisticated electronics. It has fought in Afghanistan, in Iraq again, in dozens of smaller conflicts. It remains in service with the US Army and allied nations worldwide. But its true significance lies in what it represented at the moment of its creation. The willingness to develop a weapon system specifically designed to counter a specific threat, and to pursue that design with ruthless focus on capability over cost, on performance over politics. The Apache was expensive, complicated, and difficult to maintain. It was also exactly what was needed. The Soviet Union built its military power on the tank, on the concept of armored mass achieving breakthrough and exploitation. For decades, that threat shaped NATO planning and justified enormous defense expenditures. The Apache was America's answer. A machine that could kill those tanks faster than they could advance, that could see in the dark when Soviet forces relied on darkness, that could shoot from ranges where return fire was impossible. The Yom Kippur War showed it was possible. The Apache made it real. Desert Storm proved it worked. And somewhere in the wreckage on that highway north of Kuwait City lies the validation of a simple idea. The hunter beats the hunted when the hunter can see better, shoot farther, and strike without warning. The age of the tank avalanche ended not with a bigger tank or a better gun, but with a helicopter that could kill from the sky, in the dark, from miles away. The Apache was the answer to a question the Soviets never wanted asked. What if your greatest strength becomes your greatest vulnerability? What if those thousands of tanks become thousands of targets? The Cold War ended before that question was answered in Europe. Iraq answered it instead. And the answer was written in burning metal across the desert floor. For more true World War II stories and history, don't forget to subscribe to World War II Impact.